The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile blue hue across the interrogation room. The table was metal, cold and impersonal, bolted to the floor as if it feared being moved. Across from it sat a man, hands shackled together by a set of matte black restraints that dug lightly into the skin of his wrists. Corporal Mason Riker leaned forward, forearms pressed against the table's edge, gaze fixed on the one-way glass before him. He looked calm, too calm, given the circumstances, but his foot tapped beneath the table, the only tell. Behind the glass, 6 beings stood in silence, their large, obsidian eyes unblinking. They were tall, gaunt, almost insectoid in posture, yet moved with an eerie elegance. The Kthal, an empire bred for conquest, trained in neural manipulation and precision warfare. And yet they didn't speak. They watched, studied. Mason's uniform was singed at the edges, a patch of dried blood visible across the right sleeve. Some his, some not. The American flag on his shoulder remained intact, a silent declaration of identity. He hadn't said much since his capture. Not that they'd asked anything right away. They'd scanned him, checked vitals, cleaned him up, then left him alone in this room for what felt like hours. Finally, the door hissed open. The Kthal that entered wore an insignia embedded with iridescent threads, subtle but commanding. He didn't sit. Instead, he moved to the far side of the table, placing a small orb on its surface. It hummed softly, and a low-frequency pulse filled the air. A translator device. "You are called Mason Riker," the alien said, voice processed through the orb into a hollow, slightly delayed echo of English. "That's Corporal to you," Mason replied dryly, a smirk tugging at his lip. The alien stared, unreadable. "You hold the rank of Corporal in your military structure. This is considered low-level." "Depends who's asking," Mason said, leaning back. "If it's my CO, then, yeah, low-level. If it's you lot, I'm practically a general." The Kthal tilted its head slightly. The gesture wasn't inquisitive. It was recording, memorizing, calculating. "My designation is TH-Rex. I am authorized to conduct this interaction under the Pax Interrogata Treaty." "Catchy name," Mason muttered. "What, no waterboarding? Or do you just pull thoughts out of skulls?" TH-Rex ignored the sarcasm. "We do not use coercion. Not with humans. Your kind has demonstrated a high resistance to invasive interrogation methods." "Funny, I never got that memo." "It is not necessary. You will talk eventually. You always do." Mason arched an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The hum of the translator orb seemed louder, as if trying to fill the space where something essential had been lost. TH-Rex looked down at a projection screen that hovered over his left palm. A series of holographic data streams flowed vertically, and Mason caught glimpses. Earth military insignias, faces of captured soldiers, declassified intel markers, all blurred out in alien text. TH-Rex finally spoke. "There is no strategic rationale for your rank to be captured alive. You are not a tactician, not a command node. And yet, our protocols demand you be treated as if you were." Mason chuckled, shaking his head. "So you're scared of grunts now?" "Not fear. Caution," TH-Rex corrected. "Your people exhibit decentralized warfare models. Field autonomy. Improvisation. A corporal has once destabilized an entire theater of war. Another, a maintenance technician, sabotaged a dreadnought fleet with household chemicals. Rank appears to be an illusion." "That's just how we roll," Mason said. "Everyone's got a little chaos in them." TH-Rex didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pressed a symbol on his wristband, and the lights in the room shifted to a soft white tone. The change was almost comforting, and Mason narrowed his eyes. "You are not what you appear to be," TH-Rex said quietly. Mason leaned forward, his smirk returning. "You think I'm a plant? Some kind of deep cover intelligence asset?" TH-Rex said nothing. The weight of his stare deepened. Mason let the silence hang, then added, "News flash. I patch up hulls and complain about mess hall food. That's about it. The incident on Andrus suggests otherwise." Mason blinked. "What incident?" "You were present when one of our forward operations outposts was destroyed. Precise atmospheric targeting. The timing coincided with a communications blackout orchestrated through a viral anomaly. We believe you introduced the anomaly. Mason snorted. I tripped over a wire and shorted out a junction box. If that brought down your entire base, maybe your empire needs a software update. Th Rex stared for a long moment, then touched the orb. It dimmed, and the translator fell silent. He walked toward the door, but paused before leaving. You may find this humorous, but our treatment of human prisoners is not arbitrary. It is policy. Uniformed or not, each of you is a threat node. Each of you carries the potential to destabilize far more than your apparent capacity. The door hissed open. Mason watched him go, then exhaled deeply, shoulders slumping for the first time. He wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or terrified. Maybe both. The lights dimmed again, and he was alone. But something had shifted. Not just in the room, but in the air, in the energy. They weren't going to break him because they didn't know how. They didn't understand what made humans dangerous. It wasn't training or technology. It was something far more chaotic, unpredictability, the spark of instinct that couldn't be measured. He leaned forward again, resting his chin on his hands. Let's see how long before they start calling me Admiral, he muttered to no one. Behind the glass, the observers didn't move. They were still watching. And Mason Riker was just getting started. Th Rex stood alone in the archive chamber, its darkened walls pulsing faintly with bioluminescent glyphs. The chamber was off-limits to all but the highest caste of the Cthal, a place where the truth behind public protocols and classified fears were stored like weapons. He passed his hand over the control stem and the walls unfurled, revealing rows of case files, holograms frozen in time, each representing an encounter, a report, or a directive. He selected one titled Terran Combat Anomalies, Human POW Behavior Analysis. The file flickered to life in front of him, a grainy projection showing a pale blue planet and the red splotches of past engagements. A voice, synthetic and clipped, began reciting from the dossier. Entry 047, Janitorial Strategist. Soul Cycle 08, Lanthian Conflict Theater. The image sharpened, showing a human male in a gray maintenance jumpsuit, sitting in an alien holding cell much like the one Riker now occupied. The voice continued. Subject was captured following the breach of a Cthal weapons relay. Initial assessment: non-combatant, low cognitive threat. Subject manipulated captors into evacuating key facilities under the guise of a non-existent Terran orbital assault. 10 minutes later, human artillery, coincidental, unrelated, struck the now evacuated depot, confirming the deception. Cthal forces reported significant loss of morale. Subject, later revealed to be a janitor. Th Rex paused the file. It wasn't the first time he had seen it, but context shifted its meaning. Corporal Riker's confident mockery during the interrogation was not just a display of defiance. It was part of a larger pattern, a cultural trait. He resumed playback. Conclusion: rank in human forces does not indicate strategic irrelevance. Due to their species' distributed decision-making, independent reasoning, and information compartmentalization, all human captives must be treated as potential high-ranking assets until proven otherwise. Interrogation procedures revised under Directive 9A. A series of directives followed, each more cautious than the last. What began as tactical procedure had evolved into superstition, then into doctrine. Across the Cthal Empire and beyond, humans had earned an image far more dangerous than their firepower suggested. Th Rex dismissed the archive and activated the next report, a battle recording from the storm-ravaged world of Harkon. A small unit of human soldiers had been cornered in a canyon. Their commander was killed in the first barrage. Instead of surrendering or retreating, the lowest-ranked soldier, a private, barely out of training, led a guerrilla counterattack. Over the next 3 days, that squad dismantled an entire Cthal outpost by leveraging terrain, misdirection, and unpredictable behavior. Not protocol, not hierarchy, instinct. It was this pattern that made humans impossible to classify. In the Cthal military structure, every soldier operated within a caste system: rank, specialization, psychological disposition. Everything was ordered, predictable. But humans? One day a pilot, the next a field engineer, then a saboteur. Sometimes by necessity, often by choice. He turned away from the recordings and summoned an interspecies analysis. Other empires had begun recording their own encounters. The Vraniac called them chaos vectors. The Goreth simply refused to take human prisoners at all, citing psychic contamination from exposure to Terran behavior. One report noted a human prisoner who convinced a royal administrator that his insignia meant God-King in training. The administrator surrendered his post voluntarily. It was easy to laugh at these accounts or to dismiss them as anomalies. But Th Rex saw something deeper, a species that had no reliance on external structures to define authority. They adapted, lied convincingly, fought without fear, died without hesitation. Their command systems, though seemingly rigid, allowed fluid movement of power. It was less an army and more an organism, every cell capable of thought. He deactivated the projections and returned to his quarters, the echo of those accounts lingering in his mind. He knew the others on the High Council would not accept this analysis. They would argue that human strategy was overhyped, that their chaos was weakness rather than power. But Th Rex had looked into Riker's eyes. That wasn't chaos. That was control in disguise. Back in the observation chamber, Riker sat motionless in the interrogation room. No food, no water, and yet his posture remained defiant. The guard posted outside hesitated before opening the door for Th Rex. "He hasn't asked for anything," the guard said, its voice low. "No threats. No demands. Just watches us." "He doesn't need to," Th Rex replied, stepping inside. Riker looked up slowly, his eyes sharp. "Back for round 2?" he asked. Th Rex sat this time. No translator orb. No barriers. "I have reviewed your service file," Th Rex said. "There is nothing remarkable in it." Riker grinned. "I could have told you that from the start." And yet Th Rex's voice slowed. "I am compelled to reconsider everything I have been taught. You are ordinary, and that makes you dangerous." Hell of a compliment. Th Rex studied him in silence. There were no tells, no micro-expressions, no biochemical cues. The humans were masters of ambiguity, either by nature or brutal training. If Riker was lying, there was no clear trace. If he was telling the truth, that made him even more unpredictable. "We have stories about your kind," Th Rex said finally. "About janitors who deceive fleets. About engineers who command rebellions. About prisoners who walk into peace negotiations and change entire doctrines without ever firing a shot." "I've heard a few of those myself," Riker said, leaning forward. "Funny thing about stories, Commander, they're all true to someone." Th Rex rose to leave. "This is no longer about extracting intelligence. It is about containment." Riker shrugged. "Call it what you want. I'll be here, sitting, thinking, waiting." The alien paused at the threshold. "Do not think this gives you power." "It already has," Riker replied. The door sealed behind Th Rex with a whisper of pressurized air. For a long moment, neither the soldier nor the interrogators watching behind the glass moved. Yet in that stillness, something had shifted. Not in favor of captors, but toward the myth of the man in the chair. And the longer he sat there, the more dangerous he became. Time passed in strange increments aboard the Kthal detention vessel. There were no clocks, no sunrises, no signals to mark the movement of days. Light cycled from sterile white to muted blue and back again, like the pulse of some vast, indifferent heart. Mason Riker counted the shifts by sound. The distant click of magnetic doors, the high-pitched whine of docking clamps, the rhythmic thrum of a reactor he couldn't see, but knew by feel. No one interrogated him anymore. That was the most unsettling part. The questions had stopped 2 cycles ago. Th Rex had ceased his visits without explanation, and now Riker's cell remained undisturbed except for the occasional appearance of food, nutrient blocks delivered through a wall slot with all the care of livestock feeding. They weren't watching him as much now, or they were watching more carefully, pretending not to. He paced sometimes, just to break up the tension in his muscles. Other times he sat in stillness, legs crossed, head bowed, as though in meditation. The Kthal might have interpreted it as contemplation or perhaps prayer. In truth, he was running drills in his mind. Escape scenarios, psychological war games, memories of basic training. Times he'd been told, don't think, just adapt. Those instructions had made little sense until now. The stillness ended when the alarm sounded. It wasn't a loud, screaming klaxon. That would have been too human. Instead, it was a low, bone-vibrating hum, like a pressure warning before a hull breach. The lights flickered once, then again. Riker stood immediately, his muscles snapping to readiness. A voice echoed overhead, filtered through static and multiple languages, none of them English. But Riker didn't need translation. Something was wrong. Moments later, the door to his cell hissed open, not slowly, not with precision, but with a jolt, like someone had forced the mechanism. 2 Kthal guards entered, weapons raised. Their usual posture, rigid, methodical, was replaced by a subtle edge of urgency. Riker smiled despite himself. Awfully early for morning roll call, he said. They ignored the comment, one stepping forward and gesturing sharply. Move. Now. Riker raised his hands and complied. They flanked him, guiding him through twisting corridors that pulsed red with emergency lighting. Other prisoners, non-human, most of them, were being herded in similar fashion, some sedated, some restrained. Whatever was happening, it wasn't protocol. As they neared the main chamber, the hallway trembled. A low, thunderous boom rolled through the ship's structure, followed by a flicker of the artificial gravity field. One of the guards staggered. Riker didn't. Years of combat deployment on unstable outposts had trained his body to anchor itself instinctively. They reached an observation deck sealed behind a force field. Beyond it, in the cold silence of space, floated a sleek Terran vessel, smaller than the Kthal dreadnought, but bristling with energy signatures. It wasn't here to negotiate. It was here to make a point. The ship's transponder code blinked across the Kthal interface, TSV Sagan. Riker grinned. The Sagan was classified deep strike. He remembered hearing stories about it during planetary briefings, experimental stealth, AI-assisted targeting, ghost ship rumors. That it was here now meant one thing. They weren't here to rescue him. They were here to make sure he didn't stay captured. Th Rex stood nearby, his expression unreadable as always. Yet something in the commander's stance betrayed unease. Hands slightly clasped, shoulders coiled as if awaiting an unseen blow. You brought this, Th Rex said, not as an accusation, but a grim acknowledgement. Riker didn't answer. You are Corporal, Th Rex continued, eyes narrowing. Yet your retrieval has triggered a high-level incursion. Either your species has grossly misplaced its priorities, or your rank is meaningless. Riker stepped forward until the guards tensed. He stopped just shy of the force field, his eyes locked on Th Rex. See, that's the thing, he said, voice low. You keep asking the wrong questions. You want to understand our chain of command. But the truth is, it's not a chain. It's a web. And anyone caught in it can pull the rest tight. Th Rex turned to the viewport as the Sagan began its assault. Silent flashes of kinetic ordnance and pulse weaponry lit up the void. Despite its size, the Terran ship moved with brutal grace, carving through outer defenses with calculated strikes. Kthal interceptors scrambled to intercept but fell quickly, either outgunned or outmaneuvered. Riker watched emotionless. I am not important, he said. But the story of me is. Th Rex's gaze flicked to him. You'll take me back, and it won't matter what I say. They'll spin this into 100 different fables. Some will say, I took down your computers. Others will swear I escaped by talking my way out. One version might even claim I killed you. It doesn't matter which is true. He stepped closer still, until only the invisible force field separated them. Because in every version you look weak. And that, Commander, is why you treat us all like officers. Outside, the Sagan launched a broad-spectrum disruptor, temporarily disabling the station's internal surveillance. Alarms flared louder, and this time even the Kthal guards looked uncertain. Th Rex didn't blink. "You are not a warrior," he said. Riker leaned in with a smile. "We don't need to be." The field dropped with a flicker as the security net collapsed under the Sagan's interference. Riker moved instantly, elbowing the nearest guard in the throat before spinning the second into the wall. He didn't kill them, just dropped them hard. He was already moving by the time backup was summoned. In the chaos, Th Rex watched him go, one man against a machine empire, carving a path of confusion, contradiction, and myth in his wake. And the worst part? The commander knew he'd never be able to prove what Riker really was. Because proof wasn't necessary. Fear was enough.